Messages from the Senate.
I'll just give them all to you.
Message from the Senate. This is the Downey motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 418, an act relating to state government. Downey moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 418, and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Downey, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the back office consolidation bill. As I mentioned, there is a difference in the funding mechanism between the House and Senate versions. We also added an LCC opt-in, and they had a transportation study provision in their bill. So I would like us to go to conference, and as an FYI to members, we are working closely with the Commissioner of Administration on this, so I'm hopeful that we have a good outcome from a conference committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion of the Downey motion. Discussion. See no further discussion. All those in favor of the Downey motion refuse to concur on House File 418 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Lanning motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2269, an act relating to elections. Lanning moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2269, and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Clay, Representative Lanning, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the bill providing HAVA funding to the Secretary of State, and there are some differences in the Senate version. So this is my motion. We would like to go to conference.
Discussion of the Lanning motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Lanning motion refuse to concur on House File 2269, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Norton motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage. I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 230, an act relating to health occupations. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Gerlach, Nelson, and Hoffman. Norton moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate, and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with the like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Olmsted, Representative Norton, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the nurse licensing compact we passed off the floor last evening went to the Senate. They're interested in the amendment we put on there and would like to have a conference committee, and I very much support that motion.
Discussion to the Norton motion. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Norton motion, Senate File 230, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Woodard motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2046, an act relating to public safety. Woodard moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2046 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Call the member from Scott, Representative Woodard, who will explain the Senate amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Health and Human Service Data Sharing with Public Safety bill that passed off the floor unanimously last month. This allows law enforcement to use the electronic database within HHS to do background checks on civil commitment data, which is currently under law. This just allows them to use the electronic access. The Senate did want to add some language. This comes from the Department of Labor as well as the Department of Public Safety. They wanted to add some language that would allow would allow for minors age 16 to 18 who work in retail stores like Walmart. So these are permanent structures, not the tents that would be selling fireworks, but would allow those individuals to continue to work in those locations even though they're selling pyrotechnics. That is the bill, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage a green vote.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker, would the author yield for question?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Woodard, does this mean that if the other fireworks bill that we passed off this floor is signed into law, that kids under 18 are going to be selling pounds of explosives if they're being sold in retail stores? So, as we heard from Representative Atkins that day, a pound of explosives, you know, obviously right now the law allows for some smaller kinds of fireworks, but I assume that this would apply to the other bill if it gets passed. Is that signed into law? Is that correct?
The member from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Liebling, that is correct.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think that's very troubling, Representative Woodard and members, and it's also troubling that this would come back on a bill like this and that we wouldn't be able to have had that debate. I don't know why that wouldn't have been brought up on the fireworks debate. I think this could have been attached as an amendment to that, and I think it's very troubling that it's just before us to concur with the Senate language, and because of that, I'm going to be voting no.
Discussion on the motion to concur. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to concur on House File 2046 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2046 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 93 ayes and 30 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate. Its title is agreed to.
Message from the Senate. This is the Sanders motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2136, an act relating to motor vehicles. Sanders moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2136 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Calling the member from Minoka, Representative Sanders, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I urge concurrence on this language with the Senate language. The only difference in the language from what passed off the House floor with wide bipartisan support is that we removed, the Senate removed the language on the electronic proof of insurance, which also was an amendment that we attempted to put on the transportation bill and withdrew last night because it was actually handled in a separate bill that has been signed into law, so it was no longer required. Otherwise, all the other provisions that we voted on in the House bill and supported are still in the bill, and I urge concurrence.
Discussion to the Sanders motion to concur. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Sanders motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2136, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes, 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate, and its title is agreed to. Conference committees on House files.
Conference Committee report. This is the Westrom motion. Conference Committee report on House File 203, an act relating to regulatory reform. The reports addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 203, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and 2 of the 3 conferees on the part of the Senate. Westrom moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 203 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Calling the member from Grant, Representative Westrom, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Members, House File 203, we went to conference with the Senate. Representative Hosh, Representative Droskowski, and I were on the House side. We trimmed the bill back a little, trying to have it mostly affect small local units of government and local small businesses. We lowered the number in current law from 25 to businesses under 20, or from 50 to under 25. It affects small cities or townships or counties with employees of under 25. So the small business, small county would be relieved from new rules that agencies would make if the cost is over $10,000. And so, members, I would urge your support. It, I believe, is a good start in trying to have some legislative oversight on rules that are going to get too expensive or burdensome for our small counties and units of government and our small businesses that are trying to survive and create jobs in our state. One other thing we added in here, hopefully it's a good balance, but it gives a waiver to the governor of a rule, and he could waive this exemption through the next legislative session if it's something that in the process they feel is too important to not have implemented. And that way the legislature and the executive branch could have that to flush out during the next legislative session. I urge your support.
Discussion of the Westrom motion. The member from Stearns, Representative Hosh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm hesitant to get up here because I'm afraid that Representative Davids might make a point of order since this deals with the powers between the executive and the legislative branches. But, members, I think this is a reasonable bill. We probably have instances in which we've been contacted by a constituent, a municipality, a small business about a rule that's been onerous on their operations. This gives greater legislative oversight to that rulemaking process. It gives flexibility to the executive by allowing them to grant a waiver, and also for an administrative law judge to allow a rule to go forward if they find a statutory authority within our laws. This only affects the smallest of the small, 25 employees or less for counties, municipalities, small businesses. I hope that we can have bipartisan support on this. We had bipartisan support on this bill back in 2003. Unfortunately, it was vetoed. Hopefully 2012 will be a different story.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Would the author of the bill yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Westrom, counties of under 25 employees, businesses under 25 employees, your building codes, your electrical requirements for windmills or whatever, now if most all of that is done by rulemaking authority that we hand off to Commerce or the Department of Labor and Industry or whatever. So now, Labor and Industry goes through the $150,000 rulemaking process, opens it up to whoever wants to send a letter, teleconference in and make their testimony. So, do they now have to justify it if it may cost money to a county, city, or business?
Member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mahoney, they do, but they already have to do that under the rulemaking process and current statute. And so that process is already to go on.
Member from Rams, Representative Mahoney.
If the author would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
So if these departments, if we as a legislature tell the department to take the law that we pass and create a rulemaking body, and they make rules, do they still have to go to the governor if they affect a small town or a small business to get a waiver and then come back here for us to say, yes, this is a good rule, go and implement it?
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mahoney, the short answer is yes, they would have to go to the governor and convince him why it's so important to impose a new rule on a small unit of government or a small business that is going to cost over $10,000. So I want to make sure remind you, it's only for rules that are going to, upon implementation, cost over $10,000 in a year to that business or small unit of government. If it's not over $10,000, there's no exemption, and it applies to everybody. Again, this only applies to the small of the small counties, small units of government, and the small businesses. The mid-sized business, unfortunately, wouldn't be covered in this, but we think it's reasonable to let's see how this process works. There's not going to be a flood of these issues, but we have all had those instances of constituents, whether it's a small town cafe, whether it's farmers and feedlot rules 10 years ago or 12 years ago, that all of a sudden come back after rulemaking, Representative Mahoney, and everybody is amazed at the cost. And so all we're saying is it might be a very good reason and a good rule. Let's just have legislative oversight when these rules come back that expensive for this small group of businesses or local units of government.
Member from Rams, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the members, I suspect this is going to fly out of here with a number of more than enough votes to get through. But I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to vote for it. Here we are going again and again as we have moved through this process, setting up two different standards. A standard for, I'm going to be insulting, rural Minnesota and big city Minnesota. And I believe that the people in greater Minnesota, small town, big town, deserve the same amount of safety, the same amount of regulation, the same amount of consideration that we give to someone that lives in the capital city or the farthest corner of the state. So members, vote whichever way you want, but here again, one Minnesota versus another Minnesota, and I'm sorry that we continue to do that, but it seems that we do.
Discussion. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the adoption of the Conference Committee report on House File 203 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 203, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Westrom would yield to a question.
He will yield, Representative Winkler.
Representative Westrom, as I read current law, if you are a small business and you're going to be affected by a $25,000 cost for rule in year one, you have a right under current law to get exempted from the application of that rule, and it doesn't take the legislature to help you out. So, Representative Westrom, my question is, how is a small business better off for having the legislature have to pass a law to make it effective? It could become effective anyway. And if it becomes effective anyway, there's no exemption left in the law. It seems to me that if you're a small business now, you have a right to an exemption if you fit the category. You don't have to worry about the legislature taking action on that particular rule. So it seems to me you're creating more uncertainty for business, and you're creating less of a clear right to not have that rule apply. So I don't know how business is really better off, and I wonder if you could explain that.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Winkler, first of all, let's walk through the rulemaking process a little bit. Rulemaking processes are going forward because the legislature has decided there needs to be something more to regulate this area of our economy or of our society. And so the agencies get permission from the legislature or directive from the legislature to promulgate rules in that area. We don't always know how those rules are going to turn out in the end. And so the agencies put forth the rules, the proposed rules, and different citizens and business groups and government units comment on them, or some are so busy in their daily life that they don't really pay attention to rulemaking. That is probably the more normal process. Most people are just busy making a living and take care of their families and participating in their community than watching new rules that government is going to impose on them. But once that process is done, we're just saying if the new rule, whether you intended it or did not intend it, is over 10,000, we're going to just say small business or small unit of government. We understand there are economies of scale and there are different available resources for those small entities versus a larger entity. And so in that case, we're going to have the legislature re-ratify or re-look at, is that really what we wanted to do to the small farmer? Classic example is the feedlot rules that went through the legislature in the late 90s. After they were promulgated and starting to be adopted and being adopted, there were farmers up and down this state talking to their legislators saying, how can you do this? Did you know it was going to cost this much money for my small farm to be upgraded to comply with these new rules? And so it's in those events that I think it is good for us to bring back for legislative debate as elected officials representing our area to say, you know what, is it that important that every small farm puts a berm around their farm or their pastures or their feedlots when they have 50 cows? And so that's a good discussion. In that case, we actually ended up coming back and finding funding to raise or to match some of those expenses. So that's just an example, Representative Winkler. So I think those farmers were better off when the legislature got back involved after the rules were promulgated, and I think they would generally support that. But Representative Winkler, if it's that important to put the new rule in and affect this small group of people as well, the governor and the agencies can make that decision, and we can have that discussion through the next legislative session, the way this is designed.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to ask Representative Westrom to yield to a question. But, Mr. Speaker, members, I don't think small businesses are actually any better off under this bill than they were under current law. Because under this bill, they don't have any right to an exemption. Current law gives them a right to an exemption, a right to be exempt if the law would burden them. Under the Westrom bill, the legislature holds that fate in our hands. And I don't know if any of you have been paying much attention in recent years, but we haven't really been treating small businesses too well when it comes to property taxes, for example. And I don't know why they would have any reason to trust us to give them favorable treatment when instead they could take something to court, or not to court, but take something to an agency and say, we've got a right to this exemption. I think you're making it worse for small business by passing the Westrom amendment, or the Westrom bill. So members, I'd urge you to vote no. We're actually doing better under current law than this compromise language. And if we're not actually going to be helping small business, we're better off to leave things as they are instead of just kind of mixing around and trying to claim we're doing something when really we're being pretty ineffectual and not really accomplishing very much. So I'd urge a no vote.
Discussion. The gentleman from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Winkler, to your comments, let me be clear. Under this bill, all of those small units of government or businesses would get an exemption. Only if the governor exercises, in a rare case, his waiver authority, would they not be exempt at least until the next legislative session adjourned. Once the legislative session adjourned, and if the legislature and the governor did not work anything out, they would continue being exempt. If the governor doesn't exercise his waiver authority, which was done in an attempt to meet some of his concerns and agencies' issues that they raised. And so, Representative Winkler, we think it's a good idea to have those entities exempt from the beginning. In the rare case, if there needs to be a waiver, there can be. That will facilitate much needed discussion in the legislative body and with the governor. And so I think it is a good step forward. Members, if you look back to the record in 2003, a bill similar to this by Representative Seifert at the time, but it applied to every business and unit of government in the state. I supported that. This is much more narrow, more of a starting point to see how does this work, and we know it affects the small units of government and the small business the most and the hardest when you start having rules that cost over $10,000 that are newly adopted and newly required on that entity. That bill in 2003 passed with 118 votes and unanimously in the Senate. And so, members, this is much more narrow than that. I think it's a good starting point. I would urge your support for small businesses and small units of government. Representative Mahoney, if you want me to treat St. Paul the same way, I'm happy to work with you bipartisanly on that effort next year.
Discussion. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Representative Westrom, I don't want you to treat St. Paul in any fashion. I want the state to be treated fairly and appropriately from big city to small city. There's no reason a small city or a small county should be less safe than someone living in a big city or a big county. So don't treat St. Paul the way you treat your constituents. I'll be very happy.
Discussion. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 82 ayes and 45 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference, and it's title agreed to.
Conference Committee report. This is on House File 2164, an act relating to natural resources. This is the McNamara motion. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2164, report that we agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and 4 of 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. McNamara moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2164 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Dakota, Representative McNamara, who will explain the conference report.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We did over the last couple days, last night, I guess, actually, I can't remember what day it is now, wrapped up the conference committee on the Omnibus Environment Policy Bill. We've got, when I get done, the first provision I have in here is the advisory inspection. It's a Torkelson bill. Representative Torkelson, when I get done, can explain that one. This is a bill that has the AIS provisions, real important stuff in there in regards to some of the work we're doing on AIS. The DNR's got their general permits. That was a DNR provision. We've got the park report. That was a Representative Drazkowski effort that went through our committee in regards to asking the DNR to come back with their park report. We've got Representative Rukavina's mineral management account. That was that issue between school trust fund and the counties on the allocation of that money back so that it got back into the correct funds proportionately. In the negotiations, there was a few things that did not survive. They include a number of items that had already passed. Some of them were in Representative Hancock's lands bill and such. There was a provision originally on executive council authority. We did remove that. The administration had decided they did not want to have that removed, and so we took that out. We had proposed moving the MPCA fines from the environmental fund to the general fund. That was originally an agency initiative last year, but they've decided to not do that now and didn't support our efforts to do that. They want to wait until a budget year for that. We had also had some shutdown provisions in here to allow some of the state things that have adequate income on an ongoing basis to continue in the case of that would happen in the future. We did remove those from this bill. Mr. Speaker, that's what I have, and I think Representative Torkelson, I don't know if he's ready now or not, but at some point he maybe wanted to talk about the advisory inspection. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I can stand for questions.
Discussion to the bill. The gentleman from Watonwan, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We heard the advisory inspections bill on the House floor here last week, and it passed off the floor with 99 votes. It was having a little trouble getting through the process in the Senate and has now been added to this omnibus bill. There have been some changes, slight changes since it left the floor, but it's still a very good bill. I would especially like to thank some folks that worked hard on this bill because it came in right at the last minute. Dan DeWhite from our House staff, Mark Shepard from House Research, and Representatives Tim Sanders, Joe Hoppe, and especially Chair McNamara, who allowed me to get this bill into the omnibus bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Discussion to the report. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative McNamara, as you were discussing the bill, I didn't hear you talk about the provision that you brought in from the Senate that was never heard in the House. And that was the one that talks about diverting water from our aquifers into another state. And as we are moving into a future where water is going to be scarce, I was more than a little surprised that you added this language. For members who want to look at it, it's on page 35. Here's the problem. From my reading of the language, it looks like we have put in a provision that makes it easier to divert water out of our aquifers into another state. I don't think that was the intention of the language, but I think that is the outcome of the language, making it easier to divert water. Let me explain why I think that's the case. There are two provisions in statute for the consumptive use of water of more than 2 million gallons a day. One is a whole list of things if you are inside the state, and then outside the state, there are two things you have to do. You have to get a permit from the commissioner, and you have to get a approval of the legislature if it's that much water. But listen to all you have to do to get approval from the legislature. You have to say that it's reasonable to divert the water. Reasonable. And it's not contrary to the conservation and water use of the state, and it's not detrimental to the public welfare. Wow. If I were a big corporation, instead of going to the commissioner first, I would come to the legislature with my lobbyists. And I would say, you know, that Mount Simon Hinckley aquifer that you won't let Minnesotans use, it's great water. It would make great cola. And we want to have a plant in Wisconsin, and we want that water. And members, you know as well as I do, or you probably, I'm sure a lot of members know, the groundwater, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, is an article in commerce. We can't treat groundwater going out of the state any differently than we can treat groundwater in the state. I assume, though, that means if you're more generous in letting it go outside the state, you are well within the Constitution's Commerce Clause. Members, I looked at this provision, and on this provision alone, I would vote against the bill. However, there are other provisions here that I would remind members of where we have a study for parks where Representative McNamara said, well, geez, we need to look at our park system and see if there's some we can sell or privatize. There are a list of things in this bill that just say this is a bright red no.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative McNamara yield for a couple questions?
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara, I'm looking on page 63 and looking for a little more clarification on a couple of sections in here that reference other bills that may or may not have passed or been signed into law. Specifically, the section 97 relating to the $1 million. Could you explain section 97 in the bill?
The gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, there was some folks involved in the legacy bill that we had put in House bill in legacy that we would fund some research at the University of Minnesota, something that Representative Wagenius led on, that we would fund some research at the University of Minnesota for AIS, both in regards to a couple specific examples would be zebra mussel and invasive carp. We had proposed to do equal funding from Clean Water Council and from Lessard-Sam's Outdoor Heritage. The Senate position was not to use that money from Lessard-Sam's Outdoor Heritage. So we used, we allocated $1 million for a land purchase at LaSalle Lake that hadn't taken place yet. That freed up $1 million, if I'm remembering right. Yes, $1 million to go from LCCMR to LaSalle Lake. That allowed the legacy bill, Representative Erdahl's bill yesterday, to fund $1 million of very important research for AIS. And then also, in a bill that hopefully will be taken up, a bipartisan bill yet to come, the Game and Fish bill, there's a proposed AIS fee on non-resident fishing licenses in that bill. This allows for the capture of $1 million of that AIS fee when it'll begin to be collected next year and used for this important research at the University of Minnesota. But because that bill has not passed yet and became law, we had to put this note in here. We did not want the Game and Fish Fund to go upside down $1 million if that bill didn't get approved. So this is a safety valve, and we had this discussion in the conference committee to make sure people know that the bill that'll come up later, Representative Hackbart's bill, includes this very important $1 million for AIS. And then that's what this Section 97 contingent amendment and repeal is. Thank you for that question.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McNamara, if you would yield again.
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
So, Representative McNamara, if the $1 million doesn't appear in another bill later, in this contingency, does this bill become the bill in front of us? Is this an appropriation bill then? Are we appropriating $1 million from another fund, or what happens? I'm trying to understand if in the conference committee this bill moved from a policy bill into a appropriations bill and where that dollar is coming from.
The gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Thank you, Representative Hansen. Evidently, I must not have been clear enough the first time I said it. If the increased AIS funding doesn't happen that's supposed to go to the University of Minnesota, this says that funding to the University of Minnesota will be reduced from 3.8 to 2.8, as that AIS fee increase will not have had happen. The AIS fee increase is in Representative Hackbart's bill, and that's yet to come up. I believe it's 2171, if I remember right. Is that right, Representative Hackbart? 2171. That's got an AIS increase. What that's about, members, the AIS fee increase on non-resident fishing licenses, because non-residents come to Minnesota, they go to our resorts, as an example, in northern Minnesota. They bring their fishing boat from Iowa or Illinois, wherever they come from. That licensed boat is okay to fish in Minnesota, so we can't put an AIS fee on their boat because their boat's from Iowa or Illinois. But they need to buy a Minnesota fishing license, so we have that AIS fee on there. That helps those people that come to Minnesota to help participate in our AIS efforts. And so that's where the rationale is for this very important fee. What we're trying to do is be fiscally responsible here and say, if that somehow wouldn't happen, and I anticipate we'll be able to do that bill in a bipartisan way later on this session yet, this protects that so that we don't spend money that we potentially wouldn't have.
Gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was helpful. Members, last night I talked about the shell game of moving funds around to try to make something happen, a project that's worthy but could have been funded by just reducing an appropriation within the bill in another section that we had in front of us last night. We will now have 3 bills that are dealing with that appropriation, 3 different actions dealing with that appropriation, trying to use bubble gum and duct tape to try to make this work, when the simple solution would have been to fix it within the appropriation that we had. This sausage making isn't very clean. In addition, with adoption, it looks like we've got some other new things in here. again referencing another bill. So would Representative McNamara yield for another question?
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker and Representative McNamara, it seems like the members of these conference committees were all roughly the same people. That we could have had someone working on one conference committee and they're working another conference committee and another conference committee, but we're putting things in 3 different bills. Could you explain who was on the conference committees and how that happened?
Gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, on House File 2164, the Omnibus policy bill before us, Representative Dill, Representative Hackbart, myself, Representative Torkelson, and Representative Paul Anderson were the conferees on House File 2164. And on House File 2171, myself and Representative Hackbart were both on, and Representative Dill were on that. And then also on that conference committee was Representative Cornish and Representative Biskins. Did you want more than those 2 conferees named? If you want more, just let me know.
Gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was helpful. It looks like we've got just kind of dropping things into different conference committees here, referencing each other to tie 3 bills together. Again, not very pretty, and I'm not sure this is what the public is expecting. I think these conference committees, or at least some of the conference committees, were meeting in the hallways or meeting partially behind closed doors. Kind of a traditional method, members, is that you'd at least call the conference committee together where the public could come in, take a look at the bills, do a side-by-side, and have a walkthrough. And then have some discussions, potentially take testimony. With this compressed schedule and the hurry to get done, it appears we set up a number of conference committees and start working on the bills where the public may not, where the meeting may not be posted, partial members of the committee in there, the public may not be aware, citizens may not have an opportunity to weigh in, and then all of a sudden call the conference committee, we got it all worked out. Well, maybe contact the minority members a little bit before that and talk about what's been decided. And then pass the conference committee report, get it to the floor. Now we have folks come up to the Capitol all the time, folks that are looking at their computers, folks that hire people to come up and monitor what we're doing. Pretty hard to monitor, pretty hard to watch, pretty hard to see when what we get are very interlocking bills dropped in front of us, cross-referencing each other, carrying some new things, and saying, well, here we are. Here we are with a couple days left of the self-imposed deadline, and it's a little better. I'm making these comments on adoption because we don't have to adopt these things. This is not the way it has to be done. It's not the way it should be done. It's the way it could be done, and it's the way it's starting to be done more and more. It's not the best thing for Minnesota. So I'd encourage a no on adoption of the report.
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Would Representative McNamara yield, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from St. Louis.
Members and Representative McNamara, I'm going back to page 35. And what you have here is something that violates federal law. It violates Minnesota law. It violates the laws of the 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces, because we have all signed a Great Lakes Compact. Minnesota was the first state that passed that. That was under Governor Pawlenty. He came to Duluth and did sign the bill in Duluth. He was very proud of that. And it was signed by President Bush. And what that compact says is you cannot take any water out of the Great Lakes Basin and put it into another basin. And your bill doesn't say, what you do in the western part of the state I care about, but that does not violate federal law. What you're doing, if you don't exempt the Great Lakes Basin, then you are violating federal law. As I said, Minnesota was the first state to pass this in 2007, and it is federal law.
The gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify something that both Representative Wagenius and Representative Huntley have alluded to. This doesn't allow diversion of water. This puts legislative approval required. If there's a requested diversion of water of the state, shall be based on the following considerations. The requested diversion of water of the state is reasonable. The diversion is not contrary to the conservation and use of waters of the state, and the diversion is not otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. Those things, it's just saying legislative approval is required and shall be based on the following considerations. I would say that gives our legislative a seat at the table if somebody should try and do this. That's what it's saying. A legislative approval is required so that we can have a seat at the table. I would think this is something that both of you would like, and this would help the cause. And Representative Huntley, I support the Great Lakes Compact and voted for them and was glad to be part of that. We should be glad this is in here. Now, this was a Senate provision. Unfortunately, we didn't have it in the House and didn't have a hearing on it, but it is what it is and what it says. But I can't find where you're going with that in what you're saying. You got to read something between the lines that's not there.
Gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just reading the bill. It sort of reminds me of a bill from a couple of days ago. You ought to read what your bill says. It says we can divert water out of any water source in the state of Minnesota and pump it any place. That's what your law says, as long as it's reasonable. Well, my point is, if you divert any water out of the Great Lakes Basin, you are violating federal law and you are violating another section of Minnesota law. And I suggest, again, to the folks on the other side, you ought to read your bills and understand what they do. It's not what your intent is, it's what the bill says.
The gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Well, I'm going to cut it down to a landscaper level here. Page 35, line 18, subdivision 2A. In bold print, legislative approval for diversion. Legislative approval required in subdivision 2, clause 2. Legislative approval. This is giving us another seat at the table. Now, if you want to divert the water when the day comes, vote yes on it. I'm probably going to be voting no.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Representative McNamara, I think the question from Representative Huntley should not have been read your bill. It should have been read the current law. Current law already says approval of diversion of water is given by the legislature. That's current law. What you are doing in this proposal is setting the standards for what the legislature can do. And my argument, not for the Great Lakes Basin, but for other basins in Minnesota, my argument is you are giving them weaker rules than we have right now. Weaker than current law. So all that somebody has to do, they have to do two things. Under current law, they have to get approval by the commissioner and get approval by the legislature. If I were a major corporation with money in my pocket, or maybe a corporation in Fargo that wants to come into Wilkin County and look at its water. I think it's Wilkin. Isn't Wilkin that is right under Fargo Moorhead? They have a lot of water there. They have a good aquifer. All I would do is hire the good lobbyists and say, hey, gee, this is reasonable for us to take the water out of Wilkin County and send it to Fargo. Why not do it? That's your only standard. The problem with that is that our standards that a commissioner has to follow right now are much stricter than that. So you're dummying it down. That's the thing I worry about the most. And it's current law. Members, read the current law.
The gentleman from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just quickly on that subject matter of diversion of water, Representative McNamara, you're following up on what Representative Wagenius just said. You made the comment, Representative McNamara, that the language you put in there, that's in there about legislative approval, gives us a seat at the table. And I just tell you, down to that landscaper's level, right now we own the table. We don't need a seat there. So we don't need that language. So let's, it's hard to support that bill, this bill, Representative McNamara, with that language in there.
Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2164 is amended by conference.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill, only 74 people voted for on its way off the floor. It's become marginally better, but it still weakens wetland protection. Now, we could debate how much, but it goes to a weaker standard. And this is a process that's occurred here in the last few weeks of the legislative session. Whenever we've had wetland changes that have been a result of long negotiated agreement in the past. I remember when I was younger, there was a program on television called Let's Make a Deal. And you'd see contestants come forward, and I believe it was Monty Hall that would talk with them, and they'd guess what was behind the curtain. And occasionally there'd be something good behind the curtain. And sometime I think there'd be a sheep or something behind the curtain. This bill is being presented as a prize, a good bill, a great bill even, maybe, but it's not. It's marginally better than when it left the floor. There have been some bills that have been added into it. There are a few good things in it. That since all these conference committees have been meeting have had mostly the same folks, some of those good things, like Representative Ward's amendment, could have been placed in some other bills. Good things can be placed in other bills. Since we're connecting all these bills with appropriations, it wouldn't have been that hard to put that AIS provisions into that other bill. But on the balance, when you play Let's Make a Deal, when the public's not there, when it's Let's Make a Deal behind the room, till 4 in the morning, I think, members, 4 in the morning, behind closed doors, let's make a deal on what we can do. It's a bad deal, and I would encourage folks to drop the curtain on this bill and vote it down.
Discussion. Gentleman from Dakota, Chair McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Thank you, Representative Hansen, for acknowledging that the bill is better than it was before, and that's the committee process. The conference committees, we work together and put it together a better bill, and thank you for acknowledging that Representative Ward's amendment is still in the bill. I'm sorry that we didn't take your suggestion and throw it in a couple more bills, but just vote yes on this bill and we'll get her passed into law. Please vote yes. Thank you.
Discussion. The clerk will take the roll on the conference report. The clerk will close the roll. There being 77 ayes and 52 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Kelly motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 288, an act relating to health. Conference Committee report on Senate File 288. The report is addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 288, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all three conferees on the part of the House or Senate and all three conferees on the part of the House. Kelly moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 288 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Goodhue, Representative Kelly, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the dental lab registration bill. Representative Huntley, myself, and Representative Abler on the conference committee. Just one minor change that the Senate had, where the Board of Dentistry would actually be doing the registration as opposed to we initially had it so that they could use an outside vendor. So it was from a financing standpoint, they were able to take this and do the registration just through user fees of $50 in the first 2 years and $25 thereafter. So it was an agreement by all here, and I would appreciate your support in repassing the amended conference committee report. Thank you.
Discussion. The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, originally this bill was strongly opposed by the Minnesota Dental Association. And at our conference committee, they announced that they were no longer opposed because of the changes that have been added. And so I don't think there's any real controversy. Certainly the dental lab support it in Minnesota, and now the Dental Association is not opposed. So I urge you to vote green.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference report on Senate File 288 say aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File 288 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate. This is the Nornes motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in an adopted report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1573, an act relating to higher education. Conference Committee report on 1573 addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 1573, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate and all 5 conferees on the part of the House. Nornes moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1573 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Otter Tail, Chairman Nornes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank the 5 conferees, well, 4 plus myself, that helped to finalize the negotiations on this higher education bill. Representative Mariani was one of them, Representative Banyan, Representative Vogel, and Representative Detmer. There were very few differences as we went to conference with the Senate. I'll just highlight the few that we did find. The first section of the bill deals with the student health care mandates at the University of Minnesota, and that was clarified in the final bill. The textbook language that Representative Banyan had in the bill, very few differences there. The House language mostly prevailed in that area. One section was lost that was in the House bill that had to do with increasing the membership of the Student Advisory Council. We did take a section from the Senate that provides for continued operation of MNSCU and the university, MNSCU and its universities during a budget impasse. Gives the MNSCU access to their resources and tuition revenue if that were to occur. We also accepted the Senate language dealing with the mineral research and scholarship up on the range. That's Tommy Rukavina's bill. And I understand that the president of the university, or the president of the university was actually up there visiting today. There are one section that did get removed had to do with alcohol at the University of Minnesota football stadium. That's because that has traveled and passed in a separate bill. The last thing is the section 16. This language has to do with the Board of Teaching requiring students to take a test which would have cost $300, at least that's the estimate. And in response to that, Representative Pawlowski had an amendment added. There were some changes, however, in this conference committee. It basically indicates that there will be a report due from the Board of Teaching next January with recommendations on eliminating some lower priority tests or assessments that could offset the fees that are being proposed. Again, that'll be due next January. And members, that covers the bill. Thank you very much.
Discussion. The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Nornes yield for a question?
The gentleman from Otter Tail will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Representative Nornes, I just want to be clear on what happened on the Board of Teaching thing. You know, in the House, we had passed a provision that would have protected students, prospective teachers, from paying that $300 projected cost to take that assessment. And I'm just asking, could you explain a little more? Because I was trying to protect the students, because that was a huge fee that the Board of Teaching was unilaterally deciding that our teaching students were going to have to pay. What is going to happen under the Conference Committee report?
The gentleman from Otter Tail, Chair Nornes.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Morrow, I maybe didn't explain it very well, obviously, since you're asking the question, but the original intent was to say no, they couldn't charge the $300. It's my understanding that this is still being discussed by the Board of Teaching. They're working on it. They have a group already studying it, looking at options. And I understand that the fee would not be charged until, I believe it's next spring. So we have some time during the next legislative session. If we need to do more, we can. But first of all, we want to see what other options are available. And if there's a way to do it internally, then that's what will happen. But I believe next session we'll address it again if it hasn't been resolved by the study.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Nornes yield?
The gentleman from Otter Tail will yield. The gentleman from Winona.
Representative Nornes, in the committee, when I offered the amendment, the Board of Teaching testified that it had 2 tests that were obsolete, or they used the term invalid. Why do we need to have a study when the Board of Teaching's already testified that they have at least 2 tests that are invalid? Why must we have a study? Why couldn't they just invalidate those tests?
Gentleman from Otter Tail, Chair Nornes.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Pulowski, that may be what will happen, but there may be other areas too that they can look at that would alleviate some of the costs to the students. I think this is a reasonable compromise, and again, we're not. I think we're still protecting students, and that was your original intent.
The gentleman from Winona.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, Representative Nornes, I don't think it's a compromise. I think it's a cop-out. We have very few opportunities in the legislature to catch an agency when it does a mandate on a particular body. In this case, it was just teaching students of $300. Then they testify, and that's why the amendment was offered in committee, so that we would be able to have the public, and in this case the agency, testify with the public that they were charging students $300 for a test that was really on the education department, not the student. Then they subsequently testified that at least 2 of the tests they were now charging and putting on the students were no longer valid. So I don't think this is a compromise. I think it's a cop-out. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Winona.
Would Representative Nornes yield for another question?
Gentleman from Otter Tail will yield. Gentleman from Winona.
Representative Nornes, I would hope that in the conference committee you took testimony. So can you tell me how many of the colleges of education that deal with this test were going to apply it to the student? Can you give me that information?
Gentleman from Otter Tail, Chair Nornes.
I think I need you to repeat the question. I didn't catch the last part.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Winona.
Representative Nornes, it's a simple question. How many of the colleges of education that are going to use this test are going to apply the $300 fee, which would then increase the number of fees for these teaching students to over $1,000, to the student?
The gentleman from Otter Tail, Chair Nornes.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Pulowski, we don't know. We assume that we will not have those fees charged when we're back here next January. We'll find out for sure that there's been an alternative method. We don't even know that $300 is a real number. That's only an estimate. And the fee will not be imposed until sometime next spring, March, April, somewhere in there. So we have time to address this again. Right now, this, I believe, is still the best solution.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Representative Nornes, a simple inquiry would have given you the answer. I believe there's only one, and the others were going to absorb it because it was on the department, not on the student. Members, there isn't much in this bill. You can vote any way you want, but again, there are very few times we get to say you cannot impose a mandate. In this case, the Board of Teaching did it by rule, not by a hearing with the public involved, but by rule, and they're going to continue to do it. And we all know what happens to reports. This is the way we say we really don't want to deal with it. We'll let the agency continue to impose an onerous mandate.
The gentleman from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to answer both the questions from Representative Morrow and Representative Pulowski and see if I could provide some additional assistance. It was indeed someone from my university where I teach that had testified both in our committee and again at conference. And as I understand it, that this TPA is being field tested right now. They've been going through two stages. And so the field test doesn't apply to all those institutions. As I understand it, the field test will continue into fall, and so students are not receiving the charge from an external testing service out of Stanford University for it at this time. The earliest that could actually be assessed is in fact in the spring of 2013, and the report that's asked for in the conference report will give us the time to make a determination on what would happen. It asked the Board of Teaching to come back to us and say, you know, we need to make some adjustments maybe on these other tests to reduce costs so that the impact on students doesn't increase. And I believe that this report, in fact, will give us the time early in next session to address this very important issue of student costs for becoming teachers.
The gentleman from Steele, Representative Kath.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to the magnitude of what this issue is for our teachers that are going to be licensed and heading out into the teaching profession. This really is an issue that should have been addressed and was addressed in this amendment and actually could have moved us forward so that this wouldn't become an issue. And as Representative Pulowski has stated, that this is actually a Board of Teaching making a rule that is assessing this fee on these individual instructors on a test that is actually supposed to gauge how well the college is doing. This isn't about that individual. Now we are passing on that fee to the student rather than to the college that this assessment is actually supposed to really examine and see how the program is doing. So members, there's a huge flaw here and something that could have been remedied here, and I think it's a really lost opportunity, and I hope that our college students are recognizing this and knowing that we did not work on their behalf in this bill to get that done. So I hope that we do have enough time. I hope that we can get there, but the fact is that we have a Board of Teaching that in rule right now has an intent to assess these fees, and we need to remedy that.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Mr. Speaker, members, during the break, Commissioner Poggemiller toured college campuses. He toured Winona State. The topic was finances. He learned that the average debt for a student that graduates from Winona State University now is $26,000 from a public university. We want to do one small thing in this bill and say an agency that by rule, without public input, assessed a fee it did not have to assess and can change that and should have changed it. Now we're going to do a study. Those of you that come back here a year from now, I wonder if the $26,000 will be increased by $300 for all of those students who are going to become teachers.
The gentleman from Otter Tail, Representative Nornes.
Mr. Speaker and Representatives, I just want to make it clear, we are not imposing, or is anyone else imposing, that $300 fee now. It's not due to be until next spring. We have delayed that. We have asked for a study. We want more information. I think that's how we operate around here. And rather than have a cold, just point blank, this is the way it is, I think we're doing it the right way. And I believe that we will be protecting students when this is all said and done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Pulowski, for bringing forth this issue some weeks ago, because I think what you have done and what Representative Nornes has done, and even Representative Kath, is make the Board of Teaching aware that we have questions about their rulemaking, number one, and number two, we have questions about the direction in which they're moving our students, and if the onus is supposed to be on the School of Education, the College of Education, and they're the ones who are responsible for ensuring that they're preparing our teacher candidates, then we want to keep them in check. And furthermore, we want to make sure that the Board of Teaching is not going beyond the authority that we've given them in rulemaking. So I think what we've done, members, is put them on notice, the Board of Teaching, that we're going to be watching them. They're not going to be doing a study as we think of a study. They have a subcommittee that's going to study this issue. They're going to discuss it at their meetings that they have every month, and then they're going to bring a recommendation to us. And any one of us who returns next year has to be sure that we track this, and because of my relationship with the Board of Teaching, I will for certain be tracking this, because we don't want this to be an additional cost on our students if indeed it's supposed to reflect the job that our colleges of education are doing. So Representative Nornes and Representative Pawlowski, I think you're both correct, and I think we're moving in the right direction. The only thing is, members, we have to be the watchdogs.
The gentleman from Itasca, Representative Ansels.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, I just wanted to very briefly make a comment about Section 10, and I wanted to publicly thank Representative Rukavina for his tremendous leadership here in this creative way of making it possible, more possible, for young people from Iron Range school districts to avail themselves of the engineering program at Masabi Community College. You know, for over 100 years, most of our mining engineers came from out of state, Colorado School of Mines, Michigan Tech, and so on. Kids on the range were left with the real jobs of mining, and people from out of state got the fancy jobs in engineering. And this will give our kids a shot at those good jobs. And Representative Rukavina, the young people on the range, thank you for your efforts.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pawlowski.
Mr. Speaker, anyone in this body that believes that an agency that comes before a committee because an amendment is proposed shutting down one of their fees and has then the only chance at public input admits that 2 of their tests are no longer valid, but they haven't shut those down, and then says that this test, which isn't really a test of the student, but a test of the department, won't be directly applied to the student, but is going to be directly applied to the student at a time when we have raised tuition by record amounts, we have cut higher education by record amounts. You can pull the other one. There aren't many times you can say no to an agency. This is one. They're going to do a study. Well, again, $26,000 now for every public student that graduates from Winona State. That's the average debt. And we have one chance to say, you know, 300, don't. So, members, it's too bad. This isn't a compromise. It is a cop-out.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nornes, I would like a clarification on this teacher performance assessment. You kept referring to it as a study, but when I read the last couple of lines of that section 16, it says assessments to offset the additional fees charged to students for the teacher performance assessment. So it sounds to me like you've got a study that takes place and you report January 15th prior to the assessment being charged. So if you could clarify that for me, or if you don't, maybe Representative Pawlowski could, because I have the same concerns that he's raised about student costs and student debt, and in fact we're right now in the middle of a national debate on student costs, and Minnesota now is one of the highest cost states in the country.
Is the gentleman from Hennepin asking the gentleman from Otter Tail to yield?
Yes, Mr.
The gentleman
Speaker,
from Otter Tail will yield.
Nornes would yield. I thought I said that earlier, but I maybe didn't.
Chairman Nornes.
Okay. As we work on this conference report, the Board of Higher Education is already looking at how they can make sure that the students are not going to be paying that $300 extra fee. And again, this applies, I believe, to teacher preparation not all students. And the fee will not be imposed until next spring. And so all we're saying is that we need to study it, and maybe I'm calling it the wrong thing, maybe it isn't a study, but they are working on it themselves before we even pass this tonight, because they know that we don't want to cause that much more financial burdens for students. That's just not, especially when it's not a benefit to the students. I think we all agree on that.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nornes, I think you just confirmed my concern, and yes, I understand it is for potential teachers or teachers in the or students in the teacher prep programs. But what you've just said then, there is the study that takes place, but the charge is going to be made next spring. So earlier you made it sound like there was going to be this study and it was yet to be determined whether there was going to be a fee for students in the education programs. But maybe if Representative Pawlowski would yield. Representative...
the gentleman from Winona will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Representative Pawlowski, am I interpreting that correctly, that that charge is going to be in place after the study? Unless there's probably some legislative action to block it or repeal it or something.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pawlowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Carlson and members, the only way that the Board of Teaching even admitted it had done the fee was when we had the amendment in committee. And then they had to explain why they were imposing the fee, who the fee was going to be imposed on, and why the test was needed. It was then only under testimony, and we had St. Cloud State University there, and then we had other entities there from the public testifying for and against the amendment, as we should, with all public policy, so that we understand the implication. But, Mr. Speaker, Representative Carlson, the point is a simple one. Until the amendment was offered, the Board of Teaching was scot-free, unless, like Representative Murrow, you met with students who were going to pay the fee, unless you started to go, as Commissioner Poggemiller has, from university to university to see how the fee was going to be imposed. So, again, they had to be in front of a committee, questioned, and I hope they told the truth. I would hope that they can take those two tests that are no longer valid, and I would hope they would say that this fee is not a fee that goes on students. It never should have. It should go on the department. That's what's being assessed, not the student.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, at the very least, I think this is poorly worded. You know, when we talk about studies, as I interpret a study, and I'm going by what Representative Nornes was commenting, you do a study and then you determine whether or not there's going to be a fee. Here it sounds with this language like there's going to be a study and then there is going to be a teacher performance assessment. And the testimony is that that could be as much as $300 for students in the teacher preparation programs. Now I understand that that may be offset to some degree then by not taking a couple of other tests, but there's going to be a net number of some sort, as it would appear to me here, that's going to be assessed to those students in that program.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm glad we're having this discussion of fees. Right? You know, this bill left the House floor with 129 yeses and 1 nay. Right? And I wasn't going to speak to this issue until final passage, but it sounds like we may have a chance to send this back to conference committee. And if we do that, and if we're serious about the cost of a college education on the students of the people of the state of Minnesota, and if we're serious about the fees that we are burdening upon these students, and if, members on this side of the aisle, we are serious about the debt that governmental institutions are placing upon the people of this state, then there's one issue in this bill that is a whole lot more costly in fees than the issue we're currently talking about. Members, just a couple of years ago, we allowed the Minshew system a cap of $200 million on how much they could borrow to support their institution. Just a couple of years ago, we raised that cap by 50%, from $200 million to $300 million. 2 years ago. Members, this bill now raises it from $300 million to $405 million. And every penny of these bonds that we are allowing them to authorize is paid for by student fees. And so we authorize them to add another $105 million in debt that the student fees have to pay back. And because it's debt, they will have to pay back a minimum of $140 million for this $105 million of benefit they're getting. Because, of course, the bankers get a lot. If we are serious about public debt, if we truly care about the cost of a college education, and if we are really interested in the fees we are burdening these students with, then this bill has to go back to conference committee. This provision has to be removed. Otherwise, the bill should fail right here.
Discussion. The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, members, Representative Nornes, after everybody's batted you around a little bit, let me get up and thank you publicly. I don't disagree with what Representative Biskins said or the issue that Representative Pulowski's raised, but you know, I'm just as guilty as everybody on this floor. Maybe not the new members, but I remember when I came here 26 years ago, and higher education was 15% of the general fund budget. Today it's under 7%. I remember when I came here even 15, 16 years ago, and when the bonding bill came out, we didn't charge the institutions. We paid for their bonds. We didn't charge the office down there at Minshew or the university, make them put 1/3 of which half of that goes on the kids. And you're right, Representative Biskins. You know, there's an increase in here, and it's the students that are going to pay. But I'm as guilty as everybody else because I had to cut, as a higher ed chair, the budget too after 2008. Thank God I had a stimulus package from the federal government to help me out. But we're all guilty because nobody wants to raise money, and we've tried to raise taxes on our side, and Governor Dayton's tried to raise taxes, and it hasn't happened. But there is something good about this bill, Representative Nornes, and I thank you publicly. You know, I woke up this morning at about 7:30 wondering what in the hell am I even doing here? Up till 3 in the morning. Now I'm waking up at 7, and I hear on the radio that President Kaler's up in Representative Dill's district in Ash Lake, going to the site where they're shooting a neutrino from the Chicago lab and catching it up there, and they're going to discover how the universe was made. Hopefully the neutrino will hit Dill on the way home this week. But anyway, you know, we have a land-grant college here that is a great college and a research institution. And I showed you folks last year the contribution that Miney makes to not only permanent school fund, but the permanent university fund, where those endowed chairs bring in $600 to $700 million a year into the Twin Cities economy in research. But that never would have happened if it wasn't for mining. And we used to have a school of mines in this state that we were proud of. You know, for the last several years, Kiwan Taconite in Representative Anzelt's district, and now it'll be in Representative Moline's district, has been pumping $11 million into 2 funds at the university, one of which is the largest scholarship program at the University of Minnesota, and there isn't one legislator on this floor who doesn't have a constituent going to the Twin Cities campus, Morris, Crookston, or UMD that isn't getting a scholarship from that fund, and that fund can grow exponentially. But we need mining and metallurgical engineers to do it. And one of the streams of that money was going 50 cents into the scholarship fund and 50 cents into research at the NRI up there in Duluth. And that fund was capped at $50 million, and it reaches it this year. And now it's going to go into that mineral and metallurgical engineering program referenced by Representative Anzels. But it's for all of the kids in this state and in this country, because they don't train mining, metallurgical engineering degrees or give those out much anywhere in this country. I guess it's not politically correct to talk and brag and be proud of mining, but I've never been politically correct. I'm just going to be politically honest and say I'm proud of where I come from and what we've done for this state and country. And, you know, with the oil explorations and the fracking going on and everything else in this country, and the demand for copper and nickel and zinc in our cell phones and in our hips and in our medical devices, we have to do mining, we have to do it right. And Bud, after everybody's pounded on you, I'll thank you here publicly for at least doing this program, which I think is going to not only help our mining industry on the range, but help our environment all over this country, and also is going to keep that scholarship program growing and growing. It's already the biggest, and it could be the biggest in the nation soon. So thank you, and I'll sit down, and then others can stand up and beat the heck out of you again.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nornes, I just have a question, and it's about Section 2 of the bill that increases the exemption for certain students from the immunization requirement. And I was just wondering if you could let me know if this came through the House side or the Senate side or both, and if there was a bill on it, and what is the need to create a greater exemption for students getting immunization. And the reason I ask the question is I do have a high school orchestra teacher in my district who, one of his students, their parents, signed the exemption form, and he got one of those preventable diseases and missed, I believe, a month or 2 of school, was very ill. So I'm wondering why you're expanding that category, if he would yield to that question.
The gentleman from Otter Tail will yield. Chair Nornes.
That bill was brought to the committee by Representative Mazaral. Maybe would you care to comment on that? We can yield, please.
The lady from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Mazaral would yield to that question.
The gentleman will yield. Representative Mazaral.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hortman. This actually was brought by one of the schools, the private colleges. I spoke with the Department of Health, and they in fact agreed that the definition, the current definition, doesn't address current teaching styles. So in fact, it isn't an expansion of the number of exemptions. It's really a definition as the way these types of courses are currently taught, particularly the online and what's called the adult accelerated programs. And as you'll see, that the language which we worked with the Department of Health on specified that it be limited, with the adult accelerated, be limited to evening and weekend classes. And the reason for that is they're not in the general student population.
The lady from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Mazaral. Well, if the Commissioner of the Department of Health is okay with the language, then I'm okay with the language. But I think it's worth noting that we've been able to eradicate certain diseases for the most part from our population. I think we should be very careful about stepping away from the progress we've made on that. Thank you.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference committee report on Senate File 1573 say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File 1573 as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 75 ayes and 54 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the following change in membership of the Conference Committee on House File 8. Delete the name of Mack and add the name of Gruenhagen. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a Conference Committee on House File 418. Downey, McElpatrick, Dietrich. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a Conference Committee on House File 2269, Lanning, McFarland, and Simon. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a Conference Committee on Senate File 230, Norton, Quam, and Schumacher.
Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Dean for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121, designates the following bills to be placed on the supplemental calendar for today, Friday, April 27, 2012. Senate File numbers 2098 and 1212.
Members, we will revert to the calendar of the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2098. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2098, number 1 on the supplemental calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to utilities.
The gentleman from Freeborn, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate File 2098 is a compromise between the administration, Dairyland, and Basin Cooperatives, working together with the Deputy Commissioner of DER, Bill Grant, and his staff. This agreement will secure the DER's ability to determine resource adequacy while offering these co-ops a streamlined reporting requirement going forward. This amended language offers a way for the co-ops with more than 80% of their members outside of the state that provides less than 4% of the electricity sold annually in Minnesota an exception to filing an IRP, an Integrated Resource Plan. The report to the PUC that they will have to do going forward must show demand levels for the next 15 years and estimated resources to meet those demand levels for the future. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would urge a green vote and will stand for any questions.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2098.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. The gentleman from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hackbarth yield to a question?
The gentleman from Anoka will yield. The gentleman from Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hackbarth, you're the chair of the Energy Committee. I'm trying to remember, did this bill go to the Energy Committee?
Gentleman from Anoka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Hackbarth would yield.
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hackbarth, why didn't we hear this bill in the Energy Committee?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, Representative Falk. It did go to the subcommittee of the Energy Committee. Subcommittee of the Environment Committee, the Energy Committee, it did go to our committee, yes.
The gentleman from Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this one, you said we did hear this in the Energy Subcommittee? I remember we heard the one dealing with the right of first refusal for transmission providers, but I don't believe we heard this bill. I just was trying to see if that was the case. I don't believe I missed any meetings, but if you could clarify, thank you.
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Anoka, Chair Hackbarth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Representative Falk, it did go to our committee. We did hear this bill.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The gentleman from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will the author, Representative Murray, yield, please?
The gentleman from Freeborn will yield. The gentleman from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Murray, I see that in the bill draft here it talks about Basin Electric and Dairyland Power Co-op. Can you tell the body if there are any more co-ops in the state of Minnesota that are impacted with this legislation?
The gentleman from Freeborn.
Representative Ward, this legislation will only affect Dairyland and Basin cooperatives.
Discussion. The gentleman from Pine, Representative Hilty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To clarify Representative Falk's question and Representative Hackbarth's answer, I believe that this bill was referred to the Energy Subcommittee, but the Energy Subcommittee, as a subcommittee, did not actually meet. The bill was heard in the full Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Committee. Representative Hackbarth can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think that is what happened. Representative Murray described the bill quite accurately. It is a compromise solution. It's a much better bill than as it was initially drafted, and it's probably not the worst bill in the world. Members can vote however they want on this or how they feel about the necessity of having a complete picture of our energy situation in the state, but I'm going to be voting no.
Discussion. The gentleman from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think it should just be reported for the body, too, that having looked at the bill path of this bill, I see that, at least according to the website, it did not go to the Energy Subcommittee. It was just heard in the full committee. So once again, it bears the question why we actually have an Energy Subcommittee when we don't actually hear the energy bills in said subcommittee.
Discussion.
Is that right?
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. Knuth votes no, there being 96 ayes and 34 nays. Senate File number 2098 is passed and its title agreed to. The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Representative Dean.
Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves the calendar for the day be continued. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it's my intention to place House File 1752, Senate File 201, and Senate File 1653 on the fiscal calendar for Saturday, April 28, 2012.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Announcements. The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Dean yield, would the Majority Leader yield for a question?
The gentleman from Washington will yield. Leader Thiessen.
Thank you. Representative Dean, just I wanted to know what the plan was for tomorrow so I could inform my caucus about what our plans might be.
The gentleman from Washington, Majority Leader Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen will be coming back in at 3 p.m. and recessing very briefly and then coming back to the floor for bills.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Majority Leader would yield for one more question.
The gentleman will yield.
Thank you.
Representative from Hennepin.
Which is, what does briefly mean? Just in terms like half hour, just so I have a sense of when we should come back.
The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen, probably a half hour, 45 minutes, something like that, a brief caucus.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of the DFL, if we could caucus tomorrow at 2 o'clock before session, that would be great, in 316. Thank you.
Announcements. The gentleman from Washington, Majority Leader, the gentleman from Hennepin. The gentleman from Washington, Majority Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Saturday, April 28, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 o'clock p.m. Saturday, April 28, 2012. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Leader Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3 o'clock p.m. Saturday, April 20th, 2012.